just to thank Mr. and Mrs. Neotia very much for their support for the arts, and in this case for architecture. It's difficult to have support in this field, and so it's a real privilege to be subject of that support. So thank you both very much. To Vijay and Ashish, who organised this conference, thank you both very much. And to my wonderful associates, my masterclass people who've I've spent the last 3 days with, thank you all very much for your support. What an honour to do this lecture. And in 2015, I was in Mumbai doing a lecture, and I was due to meet Mr. Correa. And I called the office to let them know when I'd be there, and they said, unfortunately, he's not well today. So I missed it, but on the way, I passed this building not knowing it was Miss Correa's. And I looked up, and you can see I'm in a vehicle at the moment. I looked up and I thought to myself, what a wonderful high-rise residential building. Its hollowness, its unconformity, its regularity. And then what really struck me about this building, in fact, was its section. It's one of the most remarkable high-rise residential sections I think you could do. And a few steps, but wonderful spaces. And it was the hollowness on the edges and the section which made me, I think, appreciate the core of understanding this architect had. And I went down to Goa, and I'm only showing you these slides briefly. This is my architectural tour in 2015. And I found a few buildings down there of Mr. Correa's. And what struck me about those buildings was there was a patience with the past and a striving towards the future. They were incredible buildings, and their heaviness was a surprise to me. I didn't expect such heaviness, but if you relate it back to the temples and the stepwells, you can understand it. And so there's a wonderful translation between the new and the old for me. And of particular, as found here actually in the corridors of this shopping mall, the way that the light was managed was beautiful, through deep, deep beams, all changing in terms of their section and their size. But I must say, what most took me on this simple trip was the stairs. This one set of stairs I remember to this day, and in fact I had to go through 500 to 600 images to find it. But I looked at this set of stairs and I thought to myself, the person who designed these was an architect. They weren't on a drawing as a set of stairs. They weren't a builder translating a set of stairs. They were deliberate and, for my money, really beautiful. And they actually made me think a lot about access, but also where does beauty start and where does it finish? And of course, your history with stairs is timeless. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, the stairs become the architecture. And these are the steps in Bangalore that tell you all about how old they are. Stone steps that are worn, they're old steps. Steps in Bangladesh that tell you what they're made from. Mud. And steps in France that have that certain proudness about them and that certain quality of culture, but they're also very, very practical. But the same sort of steps in India are incredibly beautiful, I think because of their seductive quality. And that's not a physical thing, that's an emotional thing. Steps in Italy that invite you into a building simply by their nature, and steps in Japan that are very practical, knowing how the timber behaves. You don't use that timber in the structure of a building because it fails. But you use it in the steps because you can change it or you can rotate it depending on where the cracking occurs. Then these are steps in Papua New Guinea, where Ashish referred to, where I spent 2 years studying Indigenous architecture. But the reason they use these steps is they can transport them, but they can also take the bottom one out when the top one's worn and put it in the top location. So very practical steps. And in Australia, the land is incredibly flat. So invariably our steps are timber steps up to a building. And of course, there's always some designer wanting to make steps a little bit different. These are the wonderful steps that climb up to the temple south of Bangalore. So steps are used actually as procession as well. And then, of course, the fantastic step wells north of Ahmedabad. And that's where I want to sort of start, I guess, the talk on philosophy and work. Referring to this idea of culture and how culture is interpreted and brought into our work and how we do that. I wonder who first thought of digging a hole in the ground and making the most processional and beautiful set of steps down to a well for water, but a cool space where dignitaries could go. It's a pretty amazing concept when you think about it. And it's unique to India. And one wonders how that translates into work today. The light and the shade, and the sort of fascination with descent and ascent. And then the final destination. I'm wondering, and I was asked the question earlier by a journalist, I'm wondering how you, as an Indian group of Indian architects, employs and integrates your past into the future, because your past is so rich, it's so intelligent, and it's so symbolic, and it's so important. So when I looked up Charles, when I was first approached to do this lecture, I found consistently over time these 4 values: integrated modern with tradition. So 7 years ago we were asked to do, or we weren't asked, it was a competition to do a building here where the blue mark is, which was in our terms an old building. It was only 100 years old, so not really an old building, but in Australian terms an old building. And it was heritage listed, and I was quite confused. And I said, heritage listed, it's hardly a heritage building. But they said, we want to retain the arches. And so the project was to change a nurse's quarter for hospital, an old hospital, into a creative arts centre, almost the opposite in terms of usage. And the arches were protected by heritage order. So what we did was we put 7 arches through the old arches without touching them by 30 millimetres. And then we took out all the space underneath that to create two-storey space. But essentially what we were doing is trying to reinterpret some of the very rare Australian qualities of architecture, being, in this case, the veranda or the covered room. So my sales pitch to the jury was that this would become a highly activated external room for the community, and that worked. And so these are the sort of drawings that we do. I still draw in pencil, and this was the outcome. And all we did was we cut walls, and we just put some brass edges on them. We didn't finish them at all. And then we drove these 7 arches through, and they became workspaces for creative people, like jewellery spaces, sculpture spaces. And then we cut an equally beautiful form in the other direction to get a cross connection as well. So on the first 2 floors of a 3-storey building, we created like a room inside a shell. And this later became quite a well-known building, and I should have had a photo here of a fellow doing Tai Chi, because in our presentation we showed a fellow doing Tai Chi in the veranda, and the first day I went there, there was someone doing Tai Chi. This pond here catches the water off the roof, and inside the pond, it's only very shallow, is the carving of the original landscape of that place. So that as the water evaporates, the landscape reveals itself. Sustainability and climate responsiveness. We did a building in 2007-6, which was a wool shed. The wool shed is a traditional English building, actually, for shearing sheep. And the wool shed had never changed its design in 150 years. And what we did was we redesigned the wool shed so that it was basically a climatic response to how you might manage weather patterns and temperatures, or temperatures mainly, in an environment that is a really demanding physical environment, probably one of the most demanding. These men shear, and women now, shear for 8 hours, hunched over like this, and shear about 800 sheep a day, so 200 sheep a session. And a very well-known entrepreneur approached me and said, I'd like to design a new shearing shed, a new philosophy in terms of shearing sheds. So the building was designed very much based on sheep, heights of wool bales, accurate sizing for managing sheep, and I'm from a sheep station originally, so it was quite appropriate to do this. And in fact, my father was an engineer, so there were two things combined there. And we introduced this roof system, which was a whole new roof system, hadn't been done before, was invented by a farmer. It's a deep corrugation that spans 20 metres and cantilevers 5. We had 9 sprinklers on the roof that we turned on at about 11 a.m, and they'd cool the building down. Then we took the cool air from the shaded ground, because when ground's in shade for more than probably 5 days, it cools down quite rapidly. And we ran that past the shearers. And then we had on this side of the building, which you'll see in a second, we had expanded mesh screens that we ran water down because it was a non-humid environment, and the air came through those. And with those 3 techniques, we reduced the temperature of the building by 12 degrees ambient. And so all the walls were the height of the wool bales. The ventilation came in through these chicken coop panels. And we had no complaints from our clients, which was good. But what happened was we also put a lowered ceiling in just here, where the heat from the sheep came up, and we caught that heat. And in winter, we blew it down on the shearers and heated 5 to 8 degrees the shearing platform. So that's on the other side where the shearers are, and that's bringing it across. This extended section here is for the people sorting the wool. These are vents, these are pivot vents here where we bring the cool air up across the shearers. And this shed has now become a benchmark for the design of shearing sheds in Australia. And you can see the 2-way fans up here that pull the air up and also push it down in winter. This is where we run the water down these screens, and then the water runs onto this, which is salt bush, which feeds the sheep. But as it runs onto the salt bush, it also catches the dust that comes off the yards. So there's a number of things being done here by this very simple building. By lifting it off the ground, we're able to hold 2,000 sheep under the shed in case it rained, because you can't shear the sheep in the rain. And we put the water tanks on the cold side of the building so they didn't heat up. Human-centric design, so this is the third one. In 2005, we won a competition to design an Aboriginal cultural centre at Newcastle University. And the principle of the building was it was formed around a pond, and the pond had fish in it, and every teacher working in that building had a fishing line and could catch their lunch. It had a fly roof, which was a natural ventilating system, and it had a series of light shafts. Now, the human-centric design here was there were 3 elders, Aboriginal elders, that managed the building process. And these elders, it was what became apparent, we met with them every week and we went through the design with them every week, was how important humans were to them. Much more important than the building. Every response to them was, well, we'd like to come in that way. We'd like to have multiple entries so there's no prioritised entry. We'd like the building to be a house, not an educational centre. We'd like people to have equality onto the pond. We'd like every person to have access to the outside and access to air, fresh air and sun. It was a really interesting process, and that was like 22 years ago. This is my teacher, Richard, and this is one of my students, Sue, and the 3 of us designed the building. So it's 3 generations of architect, which was really interesting. This is one of the pathways they insisted be into the building. It's the pathway from an old swamp where there was Aboriginal settlement, and then there was access in both ends, both sides and the end as well. So I think there were 6 entries to this building, none of them prioritised. The central room had a huge door on it, 8 by 8, and inside that central room was a fire that you could put on. You actually had logs for the fire, so fire was very much part of the building design, and there was a kitchen, and there was a place for elders to meet. So the inside of this room had a kitchen that went to the outside. It had a fireplace. It was a home. It was a house. And just as you have an opera house, you can also have an educational house. The outside kitchen, light shelves to bounce the light from the skylight into the rooms, and classrooms that had access to the outside. So the awareness that this brought upon us, even more than what we were already sort of acknowledging, was how important this connection is for education. It's not a distraction, it's actually a fundamental connection with nature that assists in one's, I think, balance. Corridors, these were grates in the floor where we took the cool air from downstairs and we evacuated through vents up the top in summer, and then we closed those vents in winter and heated the building. We incorporated artists into the building, which was a competition, and we had artefacts in the downstairs rammed earth wall. The earth was a local earth. And this is where the teachers would come at lunchtime and fish for yabbies and throw them on the fire, which, I mean, it's an interesting concept that a building, an educational building, a university building can be educational in terms of life as well. You can go out and catch your food. Introduced by the people, not by us. The central room open. And then affordable housing, the 4 things. 5 years ago, we started a company called Dimensions X, which builds these modular homes here. So we spent the first 2 years doing design research, and then we ended up doing CLT homes that arrive on the back of a truck. CLT, this model here, which is the 3-bay model, has 729 combinations. So someone can get onto a website and design their own house with 729 combinations, because the side walls have 3 different positions. So there's 9 possibilities per bay. And they're erected in a day and a half. And then they're fitted out with joinery that's pre-made in a workshop that we have an interest in. And that joinery gets delivered and that's installed in the building in another 3 days. So the entire building, which is about 62 square metres, can be up and running in under 2 weeks. At the same time, it was the end of COVID, and this was a student in the office, Emily Winter, and we decided that we should do cheap housing for students that they could also use as studio. So we got a trailer that you can buy in any steelworks fabrication plant, and we put a back on the trailer. Emily did these drawings. Well, it's a series of drawings. And we built this little, what we call the mobile studio, which is this building here. So it has a section here which folds down and becomes a bed, or you push the bed up and it becomes a desk for 2 people, and it has a little kitchen on this side of the trailer. So it's a lot of money in India, but for $18,000, a student or 2 students can have a little studio that they can park in their parents' backyard, they can park on a beach, they can park in a caravan park. And it's got a canvas roof, so the light comes in, it's a beautiful light. And we've had, I think, to date, 800 registrations for these. And that's the combination of the 2 buildings. And what people can do is, if they want to expand this house, and it really is working off the back of indigenous thinking, which is housing as mobile. That is, if you want to expand this house, you can buy one of these and have another bedroom study where you can put it anywhere on your piece of land. You don't have to extend your house. So the cost of these is in Australian dollars is around about finished walk-in $300,000, which is about $3,000 a square metre, which is, I know, a lot in India, but in Australia that's about third price. So, from what I can work out, the primary parameters of Mr. Correa were place, climate and tradition. And this is a building I found down in Goa which intrigued me enormously, not just because it looked different, but because of how it was sited. It was sited incredibly cleverly up against this hillside, and it had, even though it was a modern building, it had this quality of dense Indian occupation about it. Certainly not like this, but with that nature. And then adjacent to, this is in Mumbai actually, but always I find in Indian towns there's a body of water somewhere. And of course, it's for washing, I imagine, but it's also a cooling element. It's also an atmospheric element. And this is a structure I found down near Hampi, which has to be one of the first buildings, surely, by nature. And then this is an early building done when Mr. Correa was 30 years old. And I think it's incredible that it has those 2 elements plus more in it. And when I first arrived at this building, I thought it was rather simplistic, but the more I sat with it, the more I felt it was very much Indian and very clever in terms of its spatial change and relationship with water and with air and with garden. And on such a dignified grid, something that changes over time and developed over time, if you look at the housing as the last example. So what's our philosophy, and how does our philosophy overlap the Correa philosophy? I think our philosophy is definitely, how do we best preserve nature? I think that's a really important part of our future. And I was just at the Eco Park Dome this afternoon, where I read that 80% of cleared land has pesticides on it. Interesting. In Australia, we always start our talks or our conferences with an acknowledgement to the people of the country that we're speaking on. So rather than do that, I'll make a note of that. Now, the guys over here told me this would work, but it's not. This one here also flies, but maybe it shouldn't. Oh, there we go. sorry. So this honeybee has been around for 150 million years. And this drone has been around for 20 years. I mean, it's been done before. And in fact, it's been done a lot better. And we don't pay attention to that. I wonder, you know, when I see, because I muster these sheep all the time, and I see sheep, I wonder if we're not a little like sheep. We don't think enough about what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're a bit follow the leader-ish. And the question is, are we going to become like this? It's very close, this. Robots running your house. And I wonder if a robot gave you a hug, how you'd feel. I'm just going to show you some projects through the country. We're doing 2 projects over here. Kunawaji is probably one of the most remote communities in the world. It's 15 hours drive east of Port Hedland. And it's only 150 people. At ceremony time, it might swell to 500. And this is where I spent a lot of my life, on the edge of the desert. You can see the green just comes to here, and so it's on the edge of the outback. Our country is about 24% desert, incredibly flat, oldest continent in the world. Most of the water of Australia, so most of this water in the centre of Australia flows to that one lake, which is Lake Eyre, which is the most pristine salt lake in the world. And then it disappears. It doesn't really disappear. It goes to the Great Artesian Basin, which is the biggest artesian basin in the world, which has 64,000 cubic kilometres of water in it. And that's why trees grow in the desert. And at the moment, in fact, 2 months ago, this is the Cooper River, which services the Lake Eyre, floods to about 60 kilometres wide when it's flooding, and the whole country changes. And, oops, sorry. We inherited, and I think to a degree India did as well, but they fought it off. But we inherited sort of an English way of looking at our country. Winter, summer, autumn, spring. But in fact, there was a very strong Aboriginal notion of the seasons that we had no understanding of whatsoever, which were far more appropriate. And then if you look at the painting of an Aboriginal person, it's sort of nondescript but highly emotional. That painting is 150 kilometres square, and it's a painting of landscape. It's the sand dunes in the central desert. And it was painted by a man who'd never been in an aeroplane. So he's painting from feeling and walking through the place in plan. But we always paint in elevation. And there's the fundamental difference. Feeling the land and looking at it. This is how we teach, but this is the new way of teaching. And now the even newer way of teaching is AI. And the problem they're finding at universities now is that everyone's getting high distinctions because they're using AI. This is how we used to communicate, and I was talking to a gentleman earlier on about the night sky and how important it was. Around a fire under a sky, the Aboriginal people went to bed under a sky, so the sky was part of their language. And this is communicating now in Jakarta. This is in the Cotswolds in the UK, and this is the first building in Sydney. We inherited a building type in Australia that was completely inappropriate to the country. to the landscape and to the climate. These are our new building types. And these buildings, which are subterranean courtyards houses in northern China, are built for climate management and social interaction. And they're highly successful in terms of stable communities. I reckon in Australia, people would buy and sell houses at least 3 times in their lifetime. So there's no continuity to the community. The other thing is that we've learned is that this is a dry sand bed in our farm, on our farm, and I'd never seen water in it until 2009. And so that was only, only 7 years ago. 17 years ago. And yet we build buildings like this in places that are going to flood. And we've seen that all around the world. We're not paying attention to the place at all. We're ignoring where we do things. And this is this was a wonderful piece of land on the coastline about 2 kilometres from me, which became this, and then it became this, which is sprayed concrete, to build this, which is a building from America on a site like that. I wonder about our direction. And this is an interesting image, particularly for, I think, Indian development. A termite mound in Central Australia has means and ways of adjusting the temperature inside the mound to 21 degrees constant Celsius, 24/7. The termites move holes around inside, and there's 1 million termites in the mound. These buildings we build in cities, it would be very easy to design these buildings so all the heat went up, could be caught at the top of the building, we could have heat pumps there, and we could change that energy to cold energy through the heat pump and cool the whole building. But instead, we get air conditioners to use 40% of the city's energy to cool the building and cost a fortune. This is an odd image to put up, but I think it's quite pertinent. This tree is a rosewood tree in Papua New Guinea, and it was planted by the woman's grandfather. So 2 generations ago, 60 years ago, for his grandchildren to cut down and make a canoe for. This boat here is a very expensive boat and about 10% recyclable and uses 1,000 litres of fuel a weekend. How much do you need to do to make a beautiful place? How much waste do we produce on just building a building? We can build a small house out of the waste we build from the waste from a big house. And this is a whole issue of design, I think, and design today. These are the same brands above. And this is obviously in 2021, and this is in the 1960s. And I worry that our design sensitivity is by sheer pressure, lowering. And doesn't it make common sense to make energy from the sun or the wind or the hydro or the geothermal? And I talked about the centre of Australia earlier. This is the river I was explaining to some friends yesterday, the Darling River, which reminds me of the Ganges. It's not nearly as big, but has a mood and a spiritual quality like the Ganges. And we allowed, as a country, we allowed cotton farming, which is the second most demanding crop for water in the world, in a semi-arid desert, to go on the Darling, and as a consequence, we lost 2 million fish last year. Lack of oxygen. The pen started out as a feather, then it went to a nib with ink, then it went to a thing that you could fill up the ink, and then a ballpoint pen where you could refill the ballpoint. then a pilot pen that you threw away, and now it's at a point where, your mouse lasts 3 or 4 years, and the computer the same. And this is at a hotel I was at recently. And I guarantee you there was no heat coming off that fire. So we've been involved in a lot of community work recently. We did do work in Brazil, but when COVID hit, we diverted that work to the Australian outback. And we're currently doing a project here in the middle of the Gibson Desert, which is 1,500 kilometres, you can see in this image here, 1,500 kilometres of sand dunes. And that's the community. And one has to ask yourself, why are you doing a building there? But we're doing a building there because an Aboriginal elder asked us to. And we're doing a building there because I think it's going to be very good for the community. I think it'll centre the community, a building that they have pride in. And I think that all people deserve beautiful buildings. So we cross about 140 of these sand dunes to get there. And our clients are this old lady here who's 94. This is the school teacher, and this is the tribal elder, and this is their adopted son. And that woman at the back there, who came out of the desert in 1963, having never seen white person before, is that woman there. So it's quite a remarkable experience. We've got first-hand connection with people who, she lived in the desert till she was 36. And these are 2 of her paintings, innocent maybe, but this is really showing how important a simple hole in the sand for water is in their culture. It's a well. And the top one, interestingly, is a painting of artesian water. And I said to her, how can you paint the artesian water? You can't see it. She said, oh no, we understand. This is one of the wells. When I first arrived in this community, we spent 2 days being shown 5 wells. And I was like a bit mystified. Usually we get shown paintings and stuff like that. But then I realised how important these wells were to them. They're in the desert. Water is fundamental to survival. And while we were there, this lady had gone out and grabbed a turkey for dinner. And I sat and watched her pluck the turkey with her niece and throw it on the fire, and we ate it. And this is the seasons. This is a painting by kids of seasons. Fire season, egg season, fresh shoot season, insect season. This is where we camp when we're out there with the people. And this is the elder, a couple of the elders, showing us some of the bush food and what it's good for, like sore teeth, this one, stomach problems, this one. Amazing knowledge that I'm sure, and culture still exists despite the basketball court. Culture is still practiced, culture is alive. School bus on the left-hand side, and explaining the nature of the people. The fellow who had this new Land Rover lost his keys, so he left it there. It's like 15 hours to the closest petrol station. So he left it there and said to the community, take what you like to fix up your own Land Rover. Land Cruiser, and moved off. This is a sorry camp where people come from neighbouring communities when there's sorry business, which is like death or some sort of sadness. And then this is a typical house out there in the desert. The main thing about this house is it has a fly roof. So the sun hits the roof, the radiant heat dissipates before it gets into the building. But it's a very tough place. And it's a great privilege to work with these people. It's an enormous learning. but it's also salt of the earth. And so they're all elders, but this fellow is the main one. And we thought the best way to explain the building was a model, a physical model, which we did, which is this. And basically the building sits in the same line as the sand dunes. So it doesn't go against the sand dunes, it sits with the sand dunes. It puts its back down to the winds and the sand, the blown sand, the sandstorms. It's a separated roof, and then it's a series of rammed earth rooms underneath that are good for the heat out there in the desert, but they're also good for the cool as well. And it sits right in the middle of the community. Very simple planning. This is a adjustable school classroom. This is a fold-down stage because they have a band. The community has a band that they want to practice here. This is storage and services. This is where the school headmistress sits, and this is the community room around a fire. And then there's bathroom and the laundry. It's very much part of the community, which are the only trees on the site. And then you've got the elders' room at the end there. So the elders are on the private end of the building. The building is about 45 metres long and has a central dome over that circular room. You can see it just dotted there. And in order to proceed with the project, they insisted that they sign the drawings. So these are all the signatures of the elders who have approved the presentation and the drawings. So we took that to the sort of land council and said, here's the approval. Then if we move closer to Sydney, across the continent, we're doing currently a tourist centre for the Wiradjuri people, which is the second biggest nation of Indigenous people in Australia. And it's on the fork of two rivers, where two rivers meet. And when I asked the traditional owners what was significant about that place, they said it's not significant, but we want to make it significant. And local to this place were scar trees, which they sort of indicate ceremony. And the scar trees were all carrying circular symbols. But the advantage of a circle is that it's non-directional, so it holds things. So we thought, and it's very much about the rivers, and the rivers on this side of the continent also flow west. So it's very interesting. These rivers disappeared to the desert rather than the ocean. And this is the town that it's in. So the town is a very strange town. The idea was that we built a series of circular rooms and put a big roof, like a shade roof over the top, and use the negative spaces as courtyards. But that proved to be way too expensive, so we ended up with one circle. And this is a typical presentation drawing of mine. And the building has a very simple roof. The water flows to the centre, and you see it when it rains. It runs into the courtyard. The courtyard can see the sky and can see the moon. And then the walls are rammed earth so it can manage the heat. It gets very hot there in summer. This is a holding place for artefacts and sacred objects, so it's separate to the building. And then the building has a series of ponds around it that flow when it's raining and dry up when it's not. This building is out to tender at the moment, and we're hoping it comes in under budget. Then if we come closer to Sydney, to the Blue Mountains, which is the only, and it's hardly a mountain range, it's only 1,500 metres high. This is the Three Sisters in the Blue Mountains. We did a house there called Invisible House. And local to Invisible House are Jenolan Caves. And there's a real character to the country there, the limestone country, which we wanted to understand with our building. But probably the most important thing about this building is we wanted to pick up on this contour that runs all the way around this Megalong Valley, which goes for about 20 kilometres, so that the building sits on that escarpment contour. and therefore it feels that it's its front garden. And then these are both light and ventilation boxes, but they relate also to the mountains in the distance, but they bring light and change the space inside the building. And there's a lot more to explain about these buildings, but in essence, that's where it came from. There's a corridor across the back here, and you enter this building going through the earth because there are a lot of wombats there. But this line of the back of the building is curved so it doesn't hit the land hard, but also changes the light inside the corridor. And inside the building, we used a local sandstone. And it's pretty tough. It gets snowed on, but it also gets 45 to 50 degree heat days. Then closer to Sydney, we've just won, and it's out to 10. Well, prices have come in, and we're currently modifying it, but it's a very large university building, which is an Indigenous centre of excellence, the first one in Australia, and it's basically a university building for the Indigenous people. This is Sydney Harbour here, and we're on one of the tributaries on the Parramatta River just up here. So it relates to the flow of water into our Sydney Basin. And it's right adjacent to mangrove swamps. So our primary concern was to maintain the mangrove swamps and to maintain the flow of water into those swamps. This was the concept drawing that was presented to the university along with other drawings. And this is the building itself. So the mangrove swamp is over here. So it accepts the sort of energy of the swamp into the courtyard of the building. And it puts its back to the highway, which is on the other side. Interesting on this building, which is a technical fact, is it has a facade that is modelled by environmental modelling. And it has perforations, and the perforations change all around the facade depending on orientation, what sun and light you want in. So the character inside, which you'll see in a sec, is purely managed by the functional screen on the outside. Radial planning, which is very tough and takes a lot of time. And if you want to make money, you don't do radial planning. And then the central courtyard, you can see the modelled tiles on the outside that manage the light and the sun load. And then the corridors that run around that courtyard. So from the corridors, you can walk on into and out of the courtyard. So the courtyard is like a big teaching room. Not dissimilar to that first Aboriginal cultural building I showed. But all out of CLT, cross-laminated timber. So it's actually carbon neutral footprint, even though it's 4,500 square metres. Then the work in Brazil, we started in 2016 and stopped when COVID hit, and then diverted that foundation work to the Aboriginal stuff I've just shown you. But the work in Brazil was done with communities around Salvador. My partner's sister has been working as a health worker with them for 18 years, so we get immediate access into favelas, which is very, very difficult to get. But what happened in Brazil was the Portuguese brought the nature of a Portuguese building to Brazil, which is completely inappropriate for the type of climate in Brazil. We arrive in these favelas, which are incredibly dangerous places, unless you're there to help. And we spend a day working with the people. They usually have a project when we get there. And then by the end of the day, we've come up with some proposal or beginnings of a proposal. These are 3 projects we did. This was the Portuguese building, which was roaring hot in summer, and it was a kindergarten. We put a veranda on the front that shaded the building to the west. We built a kindergarten room just here, and we used culverts for the side of the road and used them as water tanks to cool the room. So they had evaporative cooling on them. And then we built a kitchen out the back and opened up the kitchen to the building to get cross ventilation and reduce temperatures by 8 degrees Celsius inside the building. And then we used actually a creek down here that the building had its back to, And we brought the cool air from the creek through the kitchen, through the building, to the other side and ventilated the building as well. But these workshops were about a 10-day workshop, and we did 3 of them on this building. So it's pretty rudimentary. One of the things we always do when we do a project is we improve the quality of the water for the kids. So we filter water and collect water for the community, which they're not used to doing. They're not used to having water tanks. We are, because we have no water in Australia. But in Brazil, they always had water, but now it's polluted. So there's no technology of catching and using water. So we built sunscreens. We built a kitchen out the back, all with recycled materials except for the fibre cement. And the students, usually university students, are integrated in a favela, the most dangerous of communities, for 10 days and looked after. It's quite remarkable. And then we got another project on an island, and ironically it was the slaves of the Portuguese who had escaped by swimming across this sea body, and they settled the other side of the island so no one could see them. Started with 6 people. There's now 1,500 people on the island, all with African heritage. And we went over there and we built this storytelling room, but the first thing we did was put water tanks on it, and now the whole community uses the fresh water from this building. And in fact, what happened was the local council came over and saw what we'd done and took that back for their own educational purposes. On this trip, we took art therapists, we took physiotherapists, we took dentists, we took plumbers, we took builders, we took joiners, we took architects from Brazil who wanted to volunteer, and it became an incredible offering to a community. This is an early building of mine, but I think it sets the precedent for much of our other work. It was recognised by an Aboriginal elder who came down and found this building and called me up and asked me to talk about it. And he said, what you have done is you've acknowledged the fact that there was a men's business area on the other side of that rock ledge. And I didn't really know that, but I did know I shouldn't be building there. And we became very close friends, and he became a teacher in master class, and he taught me a lot about siting buildings. So this is a very simple little building, but it's very efficient, very effective, and started, I guess, the whole process of how do you make architecture and stay in tune with respecting nature, but also the angle of that roof is the sun angle. So it lets sun in winter and keeps it out in sun. There's an adjacent house here, so this is the service side of the building. That's a single skin timber wall that's load bearing. There's a whole lot of lessons here, so that it's only 4.25 square. So the stairs are going to go in front of a window, so they're used as a seat for the window. The window relates to the rock ledge, which is the cave of the site. And then this is a site close to us, but whenever we do sites, we try and look at the old drawings or the old photographs of the site and understand what it was, what it used to be. We also try and understand what is the nature of occupying places, be them desert places or ocean places. And this is a really interesting building. It's an Aboriginal family. This is their living area and fireplace. This is their sleeping, and this is their ablutions out the back. And I think it's a really interesting diagram of occupation. And how do you occupy a sand dune? Because this site is on a sand dune. Well, the local plants and the local insects can show you what the breeze is like there. And so the early drawings were very much like an insect, actually. And this is what is occupying that site at the moment, this array of buildings. And then this is us down on the end here, which was very controversial to start with and didn't get through council at all. But with persistence and a number of meetings and explanations, we finally constructed the building. We always make a lot of models and experiment with how it's going to look and how it's going to be built and how it feels. And in fact, I think this is it in its best presentation, a building when it's just raw, when it's just a frame. The roof is asymmetric because this is the northern side, but it's also the side to the nature reserve, so we let the winter sun come in. And we closed the fabric, the drape, down to the south where the weather comes from. And then we put little service rooms in those triangles of the buttresses, which go down to the rock. And there's a real contrast between light and shade in this building. And it's just a very simply occupied roof space. That's one of the bathrooms which connects to the sky, so it's just a skylight with no glass on it that goes straight to the sky. It has a relationship with the ocean, but you wouldn't understand that or wouldn't know that there was suburbia either side of you. And it has its own particular nuances in terms of how you might build on a sand dune. There were two forms of occupations by Indigenous people. One was lightweight structures, so lean-tos, wind shelters, small humpies, and the other was caves. And caves, obviously, where rock shelves and outcrops were. And this is a building on the side of a hill-cliff that was a series of rock shelves, which you approach from above, so I wanted the roof to be as artistic as the building, not to descend upon a roof. So we lock this building into the rock shelves and we open it with the contour horizontally rather than vertically. The vertical facade is where you get your winter sun, and the horizontal facade is where you get access. So it sits, and the top room is the most civilised room. These facades all open. The middle room is more like a suspended bedroom, private area. And then the bottom room, you can see there's a bath there, is the cave room. And then the lowest room down here is the creek. And we take the cool air from the creek up this corridor here, which is the stairwell. We take it in the bottom here and we cool the whole house from the creek. So the natural patterns of that site are both the heating and cooling, because that angle of the wall is the angle of the winter sun. And this one skylight was put in during construction because I was worried that the winter sun wasn't penetrating the back of the house. And it was an elderly couple, and I wanted that sort of pool of sunlight to be present. But it's also, you can see at the back there, there's a curved courtyard that also catches the sun and reflects it into the house. All recycled bricks. So I guess the houses are still trying to be campsites. They are houses, but they have a campsite nature. It's a bathroom that opens up to the garden. And then this is the connecting of the contours. So each level connects with its contour. And the bottom room is the cave room. And the lady of the house bathes in that bath every night. Then this is a house we've just finished. It's on a beach. There's a rock escarpment that goes around like this. So the house is actually, this is a rock room, this rectangle. It's made out of 2 metre by 500 by 500 blocks of sandstone. And then these are two very tailored timber veranda rooms that sit on either corner of the rock room that allow the building to read on the diagonal as opposed to be reading as a orthogonal building in a landscape. So these, again, are presentation drawings, hand presentation drawings. And then this is from behind. So this is the stone room, which is a big room, 14 metres by 7 metres by 8 metres wide. Then this is a veranda room, and then there's this diagonal one over there. This is all off the grid, this building. You saw that house in the Blue Mountains, the invisible house, the one with the big roof. That guy there on the left-hand side was the builder of that, and he was 34 when he built that building, completely isolated site. He walked off the job twice, and I had to convince him to come back. And then Fernanda Cabral, who is my partner, but also works on the Brazil projects. And then Stewie, who he's off-sider. And basically, those two blokes built this house. The only subcontractors we had was electrical and hydraulic. They did all the stonework, they did all the, they didn't do the timber work, they didn't do the doors. They did all the steel work, they did all the concrete work. They're like traditional builders, and this is the fourth house we built with them. This is Mark welding, brazing brass on site to make a window. That's the main room with the rough stone, so you can feel the stone, the character of the stone, in contrast with the beautiful timber rooms on the diagonal. This is looking from one of the timber rooms, which is not butted up against the stone wall, onto a walkway that overlooks that space. And this is a box, which is a bedroom box within the big space. I got taught by one of your greatest architects ever to find the dark. And this building was searching for that. Of course, it had to have light, but it also wanted to find the dark. And in fact, it's in a gully that itself finds the dark. It's not out on the plains. So it reflects that. And these walls, as you can see, they look like simple walls, but these are screens, perforated screens, and you'll see inside that. So the timber boxes are separated from the stone wall by 100 mil of glass. So the light comes through that and brings the wall alive inside the room. And those screens are on the outside of those openings, so you can't even see those openings from the outside. And then we develop a ventilation system, so the window actually goes from there to there, but we only ventilate that section, which gives you security as well. So you have a small ventilation system and a big window. And then our brass sinks, the mirror with the cast fixing is all made by one of the guys that went to Brazil, actually. So it's beautifully made, a beautifully made building. And we have access to the roof. And on the roof we have a bathhouse. So there's a great sort of romance about the building as well. These are handles for the joinery, and that's a support system for the handrail. And then the last building I'd like to show you is a building which is up there, which is called Night Sky House, which was done for a wonderful man who has since passed away. He was disabled when he commissioned the house, and his favourite shape was a parabola. He had 2 masters and 1 degree. He was an astronomer, he was an architect, and he was a physicist. And he commissioned this house in the Blue Mountains, similar to that invisible house, but about 20 kilometres away, so on this escarpment. And he wanted to look at the Milky Way. And in fact, I did a trip from Broome, which is where that other community is, all the way to Sydney last year with 4 architects from around the world. And I phoned up one of them and I said, "What do you miss, Neil?" He said, "I miss the Milky Way." Interesting. The sky has lessened in our awareness than it should do. And these are some of the early sketches. This is a section through the building, so it's a very simple section. It's the parabola, it's the central room, all in brick, trying to be as archaic and ancient as possible. It's the social side of the building, which is slightly higher in scale to the private side of the building. It's a building for a single man who was in a wheelchair. So it's a very simple building. It's not, and maybe that was its advantage, that it had to be very accessible. It was completely off the grid. We had 60,000 litres of water. We had enough solar to put it back on the grid and run the house. We had a self-treating sanitation. And we had a connection with the night sky. So this is the client with the beard. And there's a lot to explain about this building, but in essence, it's a simple work of art. This is the private side. The red bricks are actually the same. These are all recycled bricks. The recycled bricks are glazed so we didn't have to use flashings or damp-proof courses, so we could just use a glazed brick. And then we also use the glazed bricks in the bathrooms. So it's the same brick except it's glazed. And then you can see some glass bricks up here. So they bring in the light on equinox, and they bring it in horizontal into the building. And then this water body here is, at a certain time of the year, it reflects light up into his studio where he made amateur rockets. And he was the amateur rocket height champion in Australia. And that big door there slides outside the studio, so the studio opens onto its terrace in a very controlled way in terms of scale. His bedroom in the distance, and this is like a long corridor where the rooms offset themselves so the building feels like it changes, but the corridor is straight. And then doors are recessed into these double brick walls here. And the doors have a little panel in, and they're actually two doors, a small door and a big door. So he could do it easily. He didn't have to pull a big door across. And the small panel of glass is where they meet. And this is the constellation in the night sky that he looks at. There's one of the doors in the recesses. We made all the basins, or Mark made the basins. Mark made this house as well, and then we designed and made the door handles to suit his hand because his hand was quite crippled. And we had one of the people in the office, her father is a potter, so he made all the basins for the house. And we just had this single opening in the roof that opened to the night sky. And that cast amazing shadows and sunlight, pools of sunlight around this room and changed the room constantly. Also threw moonlight around the room as well. I had a wonderful text message from the new owner just the other day, how it's changed his life, this building. Very simply done. That was Basil who commissioned the job. That's where the pond reflects on the ceiling into his work studio. It's the connection with the night sky. And that's the simplicity of the entry. Is there sound with this? Thank you. you.